Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squad for boxing news and views from around the internet. It looks like Joyce will face Bryant Jennings on July 13th at the O2 on the undercard of the Daniel Dubois and Nathan Gorman fight. Bryant Jennings, you can see here on screen, has posted this to his social media on Instagram, also Twitter, saying grind 07-13-1902 Arena. And that is obviously the date of the fight card between Gorman and Dubois with Joyce on the undercard. And that was one of the options that Sam Jones, Joyce's manager, had thrown out there in a who would you like to see Joyce face. He had Eric Molina and also Chris Arreola as other possible options. But with Molina being banned until October because of a UCAD ban, and Arreola going to be fighting Adam Kovnatsky, it's sort of like Bryant Jennings was the only viable option left, and those other two were obviously just thrown in there for filler. And this does look like it's going to happen. And I would just note as well, Jones wasn't very happy with my previous video, saying on Twitter, I watched your latest video. You're a complete hater. How can you possibly say Joe's been moved like a normal prospect? AJ boxed Michael Sprott in his 10th fight. We're potentially fighting Jennings. Stop talking rubbish. And if you watch that video, that was in relation, those comments were in relation to his most recent fights of Alexander Ustinov and Berman Stavern. The sort of opponent that a normal prospect on the way up would fight. A guy that was a former champion or a former top contender, but clearly on the slide you get them on your record for a bit because they have some name recognition. They can put a little bit of credit on your resume, but they're highly beatable opponents. We've seen a guy like Daniel Dubois, who's only got 10 fights on his resume, doing exactly the same thing. Guys like Kevin Johnson, Razvan Kajanu. So I think he's going a little bit over the top there, but that is what it is. But if this fight between Joyce and Jennings comes to pass, this is a very, very good fight. One of the few fights in the heavyweight division that we could look forward to as a very competitive fight. And I think people would be split on how that one would actually pan out. Jennings, he's 6'3.5". He's got an 84-inch reach, which is pretty crazy for his frame. Very long arms, and he's a good inside fighter. But with that reach, he can fight at range. But with Joyce, he's 6'6". He's a big, hulking, 260-pound guy. He comes forward, throws a huge amount of punches for a heavyweight. And what he's been doing to most of his opponents so far, although some of the opposition, the quality has been great, he's just been overwhelming them with his pressure and his volume. He's a very heavy-handed guy. He's been beating guys up. But would he be able to do the same to Bryant Jennings, who's obviously nowhere near as faded as his most recent opponents? And Bryant Jennings would represent a massive step up for Joyce. It is actually the fight that they've been talking about wanting. Jennings is a guy who still has something left. He was beaten recently by Oscar Rivas, but that was a very close and competitive fight. He still showed that he's still a very good fighter in that one, although he was knocked out late in that fight in the last round, in the final round. And obviously that win for Rivas has propelled him into a pay-per-view event with Dillian White. But Jennings as an opponent for Joyce, it is the step that they've been looking to take. They haven't been able to, because Joyce is so fresh in his career. He's a 9-0 prospect. There's only so much value he can bring to the table. And, not many heavyweights, especially in the upper echelon, are going to be willing to take on a guy that potentially doesn't bring the payday, but also because he's a 9-0 prospect, if you lose to a 9-0 prospect, you may end up going sort of into oblivion yourself. So Jennings is, if they do make this fight, is not walking into it without risk. And I don't just mean because of Joyce, but because of his career, if in fact he did lose to Joyce. But I like this fight for both, because for Joyce, if he can fight Jennings, beat him in comprehensive fashion, for example, it's a massive statement for him to make. And it does that accelerate thing that they've been looking to do for Joyce, but haven't quite managed to pull off to date. Even though there's been the talk of, Berman Stavern, this is my toughest test to date, all this sort of stuff. It was what it was. We knew he was going to roll through him, and he did. But this is a different proposition, a much tougher test. And Joyce coming through this, he becomes an instant contender in the heavyweight division. I think this is the fight that would signal the end of his prospect phase. Plus, if he did beat Bryant Jennings, he's got options immediately to go from here. You can go the EBU route with Ajit Kabayel. He is currently the mandatory to Kabayel's strap. Kabayel has a voluntary, and then he is mandated to face Joyce. But also, there is the WBA route that he can go down. He is set to face potentially the winner of Manuel Cha or Mahmoud Cha and Trevor Bryan. They are going to be unifying the interim title and the regular title, so well, it'll just be one belt at the end, and Joyce is in line to fight the winner. So if he can have this fight with Jennings and win, and then get into one of those two fights that I've just mentioned and win that, he is actually in a very, very good position. And for Bryant Jennings, he's coming off that loss to Oscar Rivas and he's looking to rebound. And facing a guy like Joe Joyce, who's one of the best prospects coming up in the division, and beating him, it's a pretty good statement. And for many, this is going to be a 50-50 sort of fight. And this is why I like this fight if it gets made. And full credit to Jones and to Frank Warren if in fact it does come off and they make this fight. And on Bryant Jennings' Instagram page, Malik Scott, the heavyweight boxer, he's actually said to Sam Jones, he's sort of at Mr. Sam Jones, he ain't effing around. Talking of Bryant Jennings, he's never out of shape, he lives clean, one of the best heavyweights in the world. I can't wait to see how the Juggernaut deals with this North Side Philly shit. And Sam Jones replied, he's going to need more than a vegan diet and a six-pack to deal with Joe. Hashtag getting ran over. So we'll have to see what happens if in fact it is Bryant Jennings. It's looking pretty positive that it is. And given that Sam Jones has come out so hard on Twitter against me, saying that I'm a hater, and how can you possibly say he's been moved like a normal prospect, we're potentially fighting Jennings. Well, Jennings, that fight hasn't been made yet, but if he does fight Jennings, then he's not being moved like a normal prospect. But until now, with the likes of Ustinov and Berman-Stavern, well, that is kind of traditional fodder sort of route. But if they fight Jennings, full credit to Sam Jones and Frank Warren, they would have pulled off the fight that they've been looking for, and I will applaud them for it, because that's a great fight and one to look forward to, one of the few to look forward to. So I hope it happens. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.